Welcome back to Heliodor. I thought we were done with this city, but it turns out there's a whole new district. The downtown Heliodor district. And it's terrible. This is going to be a bit of a downer episode. I'm going to talk about failures rather than successes, and that's going to be a different sort of feel than my last couple of videos, which were more about what they did right. This one's going to be mostly about what they did wrong. They did so many things wrong that it almost feels like it can't have even been the same studio. Maybe this was like done by an intern or something? I'm not sure. There are a few assets I really do like. I like the idea. The idea is that the people here are poor enough that they can't afford to live inside the city, and they don't want to live out where the monsters are, so they live between the curtain walls. You know, the place where you'd normally dump boiling oil. And I think that's a good idea. I like the idea that they build upwards when they run out of space. I think that's a good idea. But the implementation is crap. I like some of the assets. I like this tent asset. Tent assets are fairly rare to see because you basically have to make them one-offs. You can't really reuse fantasy tents. It's too obvious. I love this tent asset. This pavilion here is fantastic. In fact, it's so fantastic that I wish it had been used more often. For example, can you imagine if you cut this rope and this collapsed, and then you could run up it all the way to the top of the tent and then maybe hop onto a roof? That would be cool. It would be a really neat way to use an asset. And also, this is sort of a heavily modularizable asset. I don't think it is modular. I think it's just a one-off. But you could make it modular by just extending it in various directions. It's really nice. A plus on that. There is one asset I like better. It's the inn over there, which we'll talk about much, much later at the very end of the episode. Now let's talk about the things I don't like. First off, this is a flat level. There's no verticality at all. Now there is a second tier. The second tier is also flat and has no verticality. This is strange because they've done so well with verticality in other levels. So it's bizarre that they would choose to completely abandon it for this level. Maybe it was because they were desperate to get this as crisp as possible, this level switching on the map. But it's super weird to not have any verticality at all. It makes this whole area feel not poor, but dead. And we'll talk a lot about that. You'll hear that come up a couple of times. Now, the upstairs area is a little bit better than the downstairs area, but in order to get there, you have to climb a 30-meter or 10-meter ladder, and that's dumb. Don't do this. Snake eater. Never use a ladder longer than 3 meters. Basic rule. Ladders are really, really unimpressive. They distract the player. They make the player can't see anything. The player can't feel anything. The player's not doing anything. They're just stuck on a ladder. They are basically the brakes that you put on an experience. If you want the player to lose all of their tension, you put them on a ladder. So don't do that. And the weird thing is that Dragon Quest XI knows how to not do that. There are super high regions in nearly every map, including outdoor maps. They know perfectly well how to make it fun to ascend to a really high level. They just chose not to do it for this map. Super lazy. Alright, this is the worst asset in the game. These are so bad that I can't believe it was made by the same team that made everything else in this game. It is one wood texture used over and over and over and over and over. The roof, the walls, the interior walls, and the decorations all have the same wood texture. And I don't mean they are, similar wood. I mean they have literally the same wood texture. Over and over and over. And this makes them an undifferentiated blob of brown. They don't even look like homes. They barely even look like storage shacks. They're awful. And the weirdest thing is that it makes no sense in universe. The wood of the roof should be a different color because the sun bleaches it, and maybe there's moss on it. And we've seen that. We've seen that in other places. The walls should be darkened at the bottom from water damage and maybe have dark rivulets running down. And we've seen that in other places. The wood of the frame might be a different texture than the wood of the wall itself because it's put on afterwards, and that's something we see in other places. The interior wall should have a different texture so that it doesn't feel like when you look through the window, you're seeing the outside again. And we've seen that in other places. The decorations should not be wood, let alone the same wooden textures. Jesus. This is so bizarre. Why they chose to make these undifferentiated blobs of brown is beyond me. Now, I know that the theory here is that they want these people to be portrayed as poor. And fine. They can have their setup for that. But these aren't shacks that scream poor. These aren't shacks that scream anything other than lazy dev. So let's talk about just a little bit what would you do to try and imply that the people in a level are poor? Well, you would give them worn out assets. I don't see anybody with worn out assets. I see people with perfectly fine assets and some worn out flags. Okay. You could try and play down the colors, so no bright colors. Fine. But there's not enough color in this part of the area to offset these gray walls. You can't offset these gray walls with just a splash here and there like they did in the other Heliodor area. This is too gray and too brown, and it just turns into mud even with the accents. But that's the thing. Just because you're poor doesn't mean that you don't have access to anything. For example, these here. These are ragged clothes, but they're brightly colored. In the daytime, they're even more brightly colored. So it would work. These sorts of decorations would work fine. You can get away with the idea of using tattered and worn apparel. It's still got color to it. The color might be muted, but it's a color. And you can do something cool with that. You can make the use of that to deck this place out in a patchwork quilt of muted colors. And that says as much about being poor as not having colors does, because if it's a patchwork quilt, it appears to be kind of haphazard and just thrown together, and it's all, worn out color stuff, so it doesn't feel like it's rich. And because there's no unifying theme, like the red and yellow flags in the main area, it'll still feel disorganized and poor. And they could have done that, and that would have looked good. They could have had these all festooned over with cloth, and, doorways made of cloth and windows made of ragged old cloth. You could also use things that are obviously worn out, like, say, fishing nets. Or even these fences. Why not have the walls here be made of these fences? There's no reason for them to be made out of the same repeating mesh. There are so many things you could have done to spice this up, and they all involve breaking up this incredibly repetitive brown. I don't understand why they did this. It's so bizarre. Anyway, let's go and talk about some of the things they did a little bit better, but they did them better in a way that I hate. Sorry, as I said, this is going to be mostly me whining. So, upstairs, if you have the patience, go up. All right, here we are. So this actually has some good ideas to it. This particular kind of dwelling is lovely. I love it. I'm from the Southwest, so I know Adobe when I see it. This is a very realistic, toonish portrayal of Adobe. You can see the textures have been very carefully chosen. They're worn at the bottom by water damage, and they've got some revealed brick underneath. Fantastic work. These are A+ assets. I love them. The windows may look a little strange to anybody who's not familiar with Adobe, but if you see Adobe houses that are, pre-1900, this is how they look. These small vent windows are how you keep the air cool inside and keep it from overheating. But these Adobe buildings are only found on the second floor. They're not found on the first floor, and the reason for that is simple. They have no interiors. These are background elements, and for some reason they decided that they didn't want to make foreground elements, even though these look freaking fantastic, and they would have made excellent foreground assets if they just made boxes out of them. But they didn't do that. Instead, they only used them as background elements, and they only put them on the second floor. They look great, even so. Even with these craptastic brown-on-brown things stapled to them, they still look good. And it is a real joy to me to see adobe buildings because it's almost never seen. Adobe buildings almost never show up in fantasy games like this, and I love seeing them, especially one that is so well done. These textures are really exquisite. And I also like the fact that they actually have all the right types of wood. The roof wood has been burned black, which is something that you see. And all of the post wood pegs coming out look properly weathered. And of course, there are other pegs and other kinds of woods. And basically, these adobe buildings are using the 4 kinds of wood that I would have liked to see on this shack. So these are really excellent, and I really wish they had found a way to use them on the bottom floor for a lot of reasons, because they don't make any sense, not even 1/10 of 1 inch of sense up here in the sky. Adobe is mud on brick, or alternately mud on mud. Either way, they're really heavy. It's like a foot thick, and it's mud. Obviously, it's going to weigh a lot. Putting them on these little wooden platforms, you might as well just be attaching helium balloons, and you expect me to buy that. Maybe the average Japanese consumer hasn't been to the American Southwest and, doesn't really understand how massive these buildings are. But it's so distracting to me to look up there and see these bricks floating in space with nothing supporting them. It's really weird. Now, the worst part is that you know what can support adobe buildings? Adobe buildings. This would have been a really compelling walled city. A Kowloon-type city where there's this just narrow little walkway in the middle, and then off to both sides is just this giant pile of adobe building on top of adobe building rising up into the sky. It would have been incredibly cool. Maybe they didn't want to use adobe because it doesn't look poor enough to them. In my opinion, this looks too poor. Like, this is not a lifestyle. This is the sort of thing you would see if you were a desperate refugee, and you would immediately try and improve it. You'd add some way to make it livable. This is not a livable environment. But even if you did want to go with this tumble-down shack sort of situation, you can stack tumble-down shacks on top of tumble-down shacks. So you could have done it just as easily with shacks if you didn't want to do it with the adobe. And they didn't. I don't know why they went for this bizarre, terrible shack asset underneath and mysterious floating buildings on top. It's really weird. And it's a real letdown. This could have been really cool. Maybe it would have been too expensive. I mean, obviously there is a lot of project going on here. This is a large project with a lot of places, and my only guess is that they didn't spend any time on this because they knew that the player wasn't going to be spending too much time in here. And therefore, just cut some corners. You got to cut some corners because you got a game to ship. I can accept that. I'm not angry at them for producing a subpar region. I just see what this region could have been, and I'm like, oh no, you missed it, man. You got all the pieces and you dropped them. Except for these shacks. There's no excuse for these shacks. These do make me angry. They're terrible. Now let's talk about my favorite part, and it's not the dancing lady, although it is nice to have some energy. My favorite part is this building. This is so well designed. I can't believe it. I love this building. It is so small, but has so much personality, and it feels like something I could respect. It's got that sense of being poor while also being livable. It feels sharp and smart while also feeling desperate and decaying. It's just perfect. One of the things you'll notice right away is that there are several different kinds of wood involved. There's the outer planks, which are newer and fresher, the inner planks, which are older and weathered, and of course the beams, which are a different texture entirely. And there is no texture repetition. I mean, there is, but it's not significant enough that you'll notice it. It's not like the shacks where it's every other board. And of course there are some customized elements, such as the curved wood beams here, and the sign, and the windows that are barred in. This is obviously a piece of work that someone put some real effort into, and I really love all of it. These stands look fantastic. These braces, they look fantastic. The way that this hangs down between them looks great. I love it. I love it. Now, this area is a little bit uninspired. This lower floor here is uninspired. It's not bad, but it's not really very convincing either. The upper floor, however, is my favorite. This is fantastic. Wow, I love it. I love it. So it's got the open walls that really give you that impression of it being, not a very housey house. It's a poor person trying to put something together in order for it to work, and that's great. I love how there's a little storage area with a bell in it, and it's fenced off. That's great too. I love it. And these 45-degree off-center rooms are wonderful. This really feels like someone put a lot of thought into how to make this feel unique. And as a result, you've got this really wonderful homey feel without any sort of... it still feels poor. It still feels desperate. But it also feels like someone lives here and loves to be here and put this together with great care. I don't know why they have books. There's no printing presses. Books cost a fortune. But I guess we'll go ahead and just assume that books are free in this universe. It's a wonderful design, aside from the bizarre choice to put books in it. But there are books everywhere. There are books in the tumble-down shacks that don't have any cutlery, so I can only presume that everybody has books, which is wonderful. Everybody loves to read in this universe. They should read some architecture books. Anyway, I hope this wasn't too dour. There are a lot of things that I love about main area Heliodor, to the point where I can only rave about it. There are very few things I can point out as bad. In the main Heliodor area, even the places where I spot mistakes, they're so minor and covered up so well that they no longer feel like mistakes. They feel like strengths. But here, I can't see anything executed well except that one building. All of the assets are thrown together hodgepodge. The main buildings are just atrocious. The second floor is just kind of a weird floaty-offy bit that doesn't do as much as it could. All of the nice assets are misused, and all the terrible assets are overused. And there's 50-foot tall ladders. Don't know. But if you have a different opinion, let me know, because it honestly feels very strange. I love the main Heliodor area so much, and I dislike this area so much. Maybe my brain is miscalibrated. Maybe nobody else cares about the things I'm seeing, and it doesn't bother them. I did grow up in a land where this site would have made me laugh as a 5-year-old, so maybe it's just me. I don't know. Let me know. And next time, maybe I'll cover something besides Heliodor. Who knows? I mean, pigs can fly.